The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. Kia ora tātou, this has gone by lunchtime. There are 3 months until the general election as we speak. It's very exciting. More exciting even than that is that this podcast is brought to you by Flick Electric, whom we adore and who just got voted the best of something in a consumer thing, which is very cool. Check them out. Flick Electric, they're good. Also thanks to members who are also very good. The best members of all the members are the spin-off members. You should join them.
The biggest members.
Even more exciting than all of those things. Thank you, Annabelle Mather, Lee Mather, or Annabelle. The most exciting thing is we've just had come through the door Benjamin Thomas, who has driven in a vehicle, we'll find
without
out what.
a single wee.
From Wellington, and we have a series of questions for you. Number one, Ben, how many fuel stops from Wellington to Auckland?
Well, so obviously to get to Wellington, I first had to leave Auckland, where I was staying in the Novotel Ellerslie. I had joined a queue because there seemed to be free food and exercise classes on offer. So I've just been staying there for the last couple of weeks. Because even though we're in level 1, I think, caution always takes precedence. So I had been showing, I had presented with a few symptoms, high fever, a dry cough. 4 of my best friends had just been admitted to hospital with COVID. So I thought I'd better just check that it wasn't allergies. So having ascertained that with New Zealand's military and health officials, I bade them a fond farewell with a kiss on the mouth, got into my Zorb so that I could roll to Wellington in a hermetically sealed plastic bubble, hit a few hiccups, accidentally rolled onto the wrong motorway off-ramp in Green Lane, got a bit lost rather than seeing the broad, stunning expanse of the Bombay Hills. I actually ended up at a swingers convention up north. Everyone was pretty preoccupied, so I just thought I'd dive in the middle and ask for some directions. An hour and a half later, I was back on my way, and after that, to the best of my recollection, there was no physical contact or threat to anyone for community transmission.
That's all very interesting.
Good.
Very interesting and not entirely reliable account. But what I really want to know is, did you do any wheeze on the way? You have seem to have avoided the question of wheeze.
Obviously, there are some challenges with weeing in the Zorb, but I did have to stop a couple of once the Zorb was full. I was forced to hitchhike with a van full of hippies. But apart from that, I can't recall anything.
When you say the Zorb was full,
let's just move on. Look, we don't need to get into these details. My recollection is hazy. Once I got to Wellington, I didn't, again, because I don't know how to look at directions on my phone, so I just door-knocked a few streets of houses to try and find my destination. But to the best of my recollection, there was no interaction with other people.
That's a relief.
If you haven't been paying attention to the news, that was an extended riff by Benjamin Thomas on the story of the two people who travelled from Britain to New Zealand and then got an early exemption, had a terrible time, which Ben seems to think is funny, and went to see a relative. Turned out that they weren't tested on the way out. One was symptomatic with some wheezing related to asthma, and turned out,
or possibly related to COVID,
and
as it transpired,
with the benefit of hindsight. Sorry, excuse me. It's like a week is a long time in a pandemic response operation, as the saying goes. Annabelle Lee Mather. It's a week ago. It was COVID-free New Zealand. It was 43,000 people at Eden Park. It was marches across the city for Black Lives Matter. It was people in Commercial Bay scoffing on deep-fried prawns. Everyone was having a jolly good time celebrating. There was a poll by Sticky Beat for the spin-off showing over 80%, excuse me, that's a pre-existing condition, showing that people still loved it. And then things sort of unravelled a bit through the course of the week.
5 million, looking smugly out over the sea.
Yeah.
To the devastation.
Yeah. This hubris, wasn't it? It was
a little bit of hubris.
I
just think that throughout this, there has been numerous alarm bells rang. Dinged about how lax things were at our border. In the early days, it was the New Zealanders returning home before lockdown who were talking about the lack of information available, the kind of haphazard way that they were being processed at customs. The only way coronavirus would be able to get in was through the border, and we probably didn't act soon enough in those early days. We had the case of the cruise ship coming in and spreading it through the Hawke's Bay, was it? And now it appears that we've been really badly let down again at the border after the incredible sacrifices that people have made. And I think everybody's well within their rights to feel furious about what's happened here.
And in the torrent of stories that have come through, we should make a distinction. So yesterday there was one new case announced, which was a person who had travelled from Pakistan to New Zealand. They tested him. They found out that he had COVID. Now that's exactly how
the system works.
That's the system working. Let's not get up in arms about that. The problem is where it turns out that despite what we were told, routine testing was not actually happening. It seems for either any or at least a significant number of people in quarantine. There were a lot of exemptions being granted on compassionate grounds without appropriate safeguards, in particular the testing. And then, of course, there's these more sort of funny side notes. For instance, yesterday we learned that a rough sleeper had joined the queue of COVID refugees going into the Novotel. Nobody had asked who he was. They obviously weren't doing a proper head count. They don't seem to know who's in the hotels.
Michael Woodhouse said that happened. We don't know for sure. If
okay, sure, yeah. We well, exactly, and it seems neither does the Ministry of Health. Yeah. I mean, it is possible that they were keeping a proper head count, and this was all some sort of 80s mistaken identity kind of movie. And we have an overseas millionaire living on the streets right now. But but it does show that.
Maybe it was what's his name, the director of Avatar, James. What's his name? Cameron. Yeah. There is also, I think, one of the we've been sort of all quite proud of the zero cases thing. Whereas if you look at some of the states in Australia who've had their case numbers they've had the ones that are the worry are the ones that are locally transmitted, but they've had quite a few imported cases, and they seem to have a stricter regimen of testing people in those managed self-isolation situations. And with the arrival from Pakistan, that's been a test, but I don't know that he was particularly... so there is this... We very likely have had people along the way who weren't being tested. That's fine. They're in the 2-week incubation periods. They're being looked after. But the idea of us having zero may have been a little misleading.
Yeah, sure. And one of the risks... Obviously, the first is that we don't test somebody and we let them out with COVID. The second is that there is actually a chance of infection in these quarantine areas. In the sense, we saw photos of birthday parties. With mixing the streams, as it were, of people who had come in from different flights who were from different parts of the world. It's no use keeping people in for the 14 days, the incubation period, if they get COVID on the last day they're there from somebody else who has it, and then go out into wider society. And obviously, it's easy. Once we started dealing with small numbers towards the end of what we would call, the first phase of elimination, it's easy to forget, the viral / exponential growth. As we heard from officials, they identified 320 close contacts of the 2 women who tested positive for COVID. So this can spread very, very fast if it's not brought under control. That's all pretty well settled, I think. But and you would hope that now they're tightening up on the strictures. Where this leaves the government, though, is, it almost seems a bit trivial to talk about the political consequences, because the most important consequence is that we don't get another virus outbreak, go into another lockdown, tank the economy. But politically, this is very difficult for the government because COVID and, what has been seen as an outstanding response so far has kind of obscured the fact that this government has continued to fail to deliver on its promises even through the crisis. We've now seen that light rail is going absolutely nowhere. That was meant to be finished to Mount Roskill next year. Right now they don't even have a provider settled on, and Shane Jones has suggested that will not happen before the election. So that adds obviously to the failure of KiwiBuild, the slowness in rolling out the mental health response to the inquiry, and the various other sort of litany of policy weaknesses that this government's had, or implementation weaknesses. But what they've been able to say, with a lot of credibility, is we stopped COVID. We are in a better position than anywhere else in the world, and that's obviously a hugely attractive thing to go into campaigning in an election on. And right now, that seems to have fallen apart or gone off the rails a little bit in the last week.
I agree. I think that this was their saving grace in a lot of ways, the COVID response, and they made some tough decisions and they weathered some strong criticism, and they seemed to get a fantastic result, and that now it appears a case of literally snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And what makes them particularly vulnerable is it's happening at a time too when New Zealand First are very eager to differentiate themselves from the government. So any missteps in any other place are going to be highlighted and trumpeted by New Zealand First. So they're particularly vulnerable.
Is there a danger that we're overstating the gravity of this? So there have clearly been some holes in the system, and it is not proved to be as impermeable as we would like it to be. But the people who were contacts have been tracked down. They'll tighten it up. Is it a full unravelling, or is it a problem that's being sorted? And we see that the Prime Minister has brought in the military, and not just the military. She's found somebody who has the name Digby, which
that's big, yeah.
Which is a huge achievement when you consider. I mean, Digby just sounds like someone who has been working in the
Digby, Bartholomew, Custer's, Sandra.
It sounds like sort of been
one of
working
our
in
World War II heroes.
for several hundred years has been at the forefront of the Allied effort against.
I think it would be a huge mistake to underestimate the depth of feeling people have about this.
Yeah.
And while I think that there's, obviously sympathy, these women have, I understand, lost a parent. Over the course of the lockdown and the various levels, hundreds, if not thousands of families around the country have lost their loved ones, parents, grandparents, children, and not being able to mourn them in the way that they usually would. And that's absolutely heartbreaking.
Yes.
And so, these are people who have been in New Zealand, who haven't been exposed to COVID, who may even live in parts of the country where there were no COVID cases being reported, and they were being expected to make those incredible sacrifices, and we did. And so that these women can come from a country where there's still 1,200 new cases being registered every day and allowed to do a Corona and Louise road trip across New Zealand. I think, possibly it's an overstatement by Woodhouse that they've pashed Brad Pitt and Waiota or whatever. But it's for many inconceivable, and I think that we really need to see a strong response, because to downplay it, I think, would be a mistake.
Yeah, has the system totally unravelled? Clearly not. On the other hand, what we're talking about, from the government's point of view, is its aura of competence. First of all, we were assured that everyone was under the impression that people were being tested at the border before they were being released from quarantine. I think everybody would have just assumed that if you were to get compassionate leave to leave quarantine, that you would get a test, and that's just turned out not to be the case. That we were told it was happening,
that's
and it
what we were
wasn't
told.
happening.
It wasn't an inference.
That's right. So we're and that causes you to doubt. Well, how much else of what we're being told.
And people
about what's
now
happening.
are worried about
and look, sure, maybe
air crews,
and
other elements
Yeah,
of the
that's
border
right.
control.
I think it's highlighted other issues that may have sailed under the radar, like why is it that everybody else is like wearing PPE up to the, nth degree, and yet in New Zealand you can basically just wear jandals and a face mask and beachwear and a face mask and you're good to go.
Yeah, and also in terms of Digby, Digby's actually been in charge of the logistics at the border for the last 3 months.
Well,
so
Ron Mark said this morning, there's some confusion around that, and it's clearly, this goes to an issue around the communications more widely in terms of that both Checkpoint and Newshub were reporting last night, having spent the day trying to find out what his role had been previously. Now, Ron Mark crops up this morning saying, in fact, he'd been in charge of repatriation flights and not in charge of their border stuff. So, but so much for the fated communications part of the whole business, right?
Yeah, and we're making this up as we go along as a fine line when we've got a new disease.
Yes.
We're trying to figure out how to lock down the country for the first time. I think there's a reasonable expectation that at this point the processes will be in place at the border.
Yes.
There was an attempt by the government, which I thought was risible, I think, to pin this on Chris Bishop, because he had forwarded an email from the women to the Ministry of Health's application line.
Yeah.
And this was sort of Labour's gotcha in the House to show that National was somehow complicit in this.
Seemed like pretty base politics, didn't it?
Well, it's people have always sort of talked about, their reticence to actually go through the official channels if government ministers are going to go and use it in Parliament against them. Yeah. There's no suggestion that Bishop asked for special favours, asked for any procedures to be curtailed. He was just doing normal constituent work.
Yeah, but equally, did Michael Woodhouse go and give the Ministry of Health an early heads up before he went into the health that Corona and Louise had been pashing people on the side of the road, or did he wait until question time before he...
He didn't do anything, and I think it's fair to say that it would have been better had he alerted the ministry before he'd gone into the house, even just in terms of doing the responsible thing. I think you make a really important point, Ben, about you can accept that when things are done in haste, they will not be perfect. You can accept that when there's a global pandemic that is the storm clouds are rolling in towards you, and you have to take these completely unimaginable steps involving closing the border and massively shackling people's liberties, that those things are not going to be perfect. But it's a bit like when you stick a piece of wood over a broken window to stop the weather getting in overnight, but then you need to go and fix it properly. And it seems like they've done a lot of kind of immediate measures and then not gone back and fixed them up properly, not gone back and checked those. All those hotels are there. Where were the people auditing them properly regularly to make sure that these cracks didn't appear?
Well, the ombudsman went in to audit them, and then it turned out he was having dinner with a whole bunch of quarantine.
Yes, he went through and he said they were mingling, and then he I mean, it's a serious point because he said that he'd gone into they were going on a prison visit in Auckland, he and some of his team, and he went to a hotel where they ended up mingling or walking in very close proximity to some people who had come in on flights. And you can imagine even if it's just a very, very small chance that one of those people had then gone to a prison then they'd have been in a prison. These are the kind of, and look, I feel like we've had some really good work and some good luck, but in a way, maybe, sometimes you do some bad luck. Sometimes you do get what, South Korea has seen examples of this, where it's kind of, that was pretty fucking bad luck, but you need to be ready for that luck.
And where the government has responsibility for this is, obviously, as Winston Peters said in the House, David Clark is not there personally signing off everyone's, exemptions. He's not there testing people for COVID. But at a bare minimum, the minister should be making sure that what he and his government have promised the New Zealand public is actually being put into effect by his officials. The fact that David Clark still doesn't have answers on, are tests being conducted, how many tests have been conducted, how many people have been released. This is just incredibly shoddy ministerial work. This would never have happened under Tony Ryle as Minister of Health, Helen Clark as Minister of Health, Bill English as Minister of Health. Quite probably would have happened under Jonathan Coleman as Minister of Health. But you can't.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. It was certainly noticeable that when the sainted, I mean, literally in the form of a Wellington shop window, Ashley Bloomfield fronted was it yesterday on Thursday for a very difficult press conference in which the mood had changed dramatically and the questions were sharper.
No broad smiles in sight.
So they should have been, but he was there alone. There was no. I sort of thought, where is Ombla, who's meant to be the head of the all-of-government response? Where is Mike Bush? Where is Jacinda Ardern? Where is David Clark? And I mean, he's the minister who's in charge of it. It seems interesting that Bloomfield was there alone. It seemed interesting to me. But and David Clark, well, let's talk about David Clark. He oversaw and presented this week the Simpson Review, which is a pretty amazing. It's had mostly good reviews. There are some serious and real criticisms of it, but we should be talking about that. It's interesting that this. We're trimming down the number of DHBs, trying to address inequities for Māori and Pacifica, looking at questions for disabled people. All of that stuff is in there. And yet David Clark instead is left in this position where his authority appears undermined, perhaps fatally. We were told that he would have been sacked were it not for the fact that we were in the middle of this extraordinary crisis when he did his mountain biking and beach trips. And now what? I mean, I sort of feel like the succession of stories that came out on Wednesday night was something to behold, wasn't it? When there was sort of a dam burst and it seemed like everyone who had a similar experience was calling up a reporter to tell them what had happened. Is it sustainable? At what point at what point is it, and I mean, I hate talking about scalps and heads rolling and all that sort of thing, but to put it in a serious way, it's about accountability, isn't it? And it's about taking responsibility. And sometimes the way of taking responsibility is by acknowledging that somebody needs to take the ultimate responsibility and lose their job.
It's the only real mechanism of accountability that we have democratically. On a national level, we can vote a government out. On, the Prime Minister's lever for making sure that doesn't happen is that she can sack ministers. We can't vote Ashley Bloomfield out. We can't cut his pay. We can't have him fired. Like, the only line of accountability to the public is through the minister and through the government. And it actually is.
Rolling. Keep going.
What?
Tina Tiller, our producer extraordinaire, has just left the room. I'm not sure why. I guess she was just tiring of listening to Ben.
Now's our time to swear.
We could say mean things about Tina, eh? Now she's out of the room.
Tina, you little spunk.
Tina, is mine.
Yeah.
Have you got any?
Shit, Tina needs to resign. It's the only method of accountability.
Tina does need to take responsibility for not being in the.
It's very David Clark like actually.
When you
when you think about it, she's just left halfway through. Probably driving
gone for a mountain bike.
Woodhill Forest in a big van with her face on the side of it.
She's probably stopping to kiss and cuddle on the way there, pissing in a bottle.
Anyway,
Tina must go.
After we've sacked Tina, David Clark, Jacinda Ardern was on her weekly morning media, was singing his praises, talking about the good decisions he had made during the lockdown, and talking about how she had full confidence in him now, which, look, I don't believe for a second. I think she was just soft peddling his exit. This week we saw the Labour list unveiled. Dr. Aisha Varel, the contact tracing and infectious diseases expert, is the highest ranked newcomer at number 7.
As tipped on this podcast by Ben Thomas repeatedly.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. Who do you really work for, Ben?
And in the pocket of big infectious disease expert.
Yeah.
She's the obvious choice, I would have thought, to take over from Clark. Now, there might be a bit of trepidation at putting a first-term MP in as, in a position that vital, but I would have thought there was much more trepidation letting David Clark continue. And I think that continuing to defend her Minister of Health, who at best is absent, just missing in action, at worst is completely incompetent in that role, is just going to erode trust in the government.
The subtext, I mean, the pretty clear subtext of the things that she said back in whenever it was, in March, I suppose, the end of March, about Clark's future, the subtext was clear. It's that he is not going to be the health minister should Labour win re-election. The question now, obviously you don't want to have to sack somebody 3 months out from an election. You don't want to have to do a reshuffle 3 months out from an election. You don't want that spotlight on you. Tina's back.
Sorry.
We sacked you, Tina.
Well, fine, whatever.
But I mean, I guess the question is at some point as well, you need to politically rip off the plaster.
Well, I think she's obviously been trying to maintain his mana, as you say, in a soft exit. But I feel like the mood of the public requires more.
And the thing is that there's not actually, the Simpson report is not going to be put into action in the 90 days before an election. You don't make big decisions like that, with the exception of the COVID response, which is, a bit of an unfair advantage this government has, unfair in the sort of cosmic justice sense for the poor old National Party. But so they're not going to be starting on that substantive work. So basically health before the election in terms of big government decisions is COVID related. That's being run by the Prime Minister and by the Director General and apparently by sort of black and white military wingman commanders. And so there is no real reason. I think a symbolic relieving of him of his portfolio, giving him the COVID welfare wage where you don't have to go on the dole immediately. You can stay on your warrantless minister's salary until the election. Just to ease the transition back into a life of full-time mountain biking. But there really does need to be accountability. If you look at the people that Jacinda Ardern has essentially sacked as a minister or forced to resign, there's Claire Curran, very hapless with misleading people about her diary appointments. There's Meka Whaitiri, who was found to have
questions around what had happened. There
are questions around how her staffer received bruising, and you look at then David Clark, and you sort of think, well, what does the struggling minority of a white middle-aged man on the Labour front bench need to do to lose their job?
Let's talk about Todd Muller, who gave a speech on Sunday.
Oh, wait, breaking news.
Breaking news from Housing Minister Megan Woods to oversee managed isolation and quarantine facilities. So does that mean that she's in charge of Digby now? I mean, is that now part of our housing policy? 2 weeks. Yeah, she's in charge of all accommodation.
Is it? Well, as you guys reported on the Spin-Offs Daily Bulletin, your rolling live updates, highly recommended. Yeah. Which was that the government accidentally housed a homeless person in the quarantine hotels, and maybe that was a light bulb moment for the government. Yeah. They were like, if we could do it accidentally, maybe we could do it on purpose.
Well, they're spending $100 million on, I think it's 1,200 motel rooms over the next 12 months to house the homeless.
Yeah.
So maybe he just wandered into the wrong motel.
Good. Well, so Megan Woods has become the new... It was Chris Farfoy, but now Megan Woods is the emergency minister to take care of things that other ministers don't seem to be able to take care of. It's weird. We don't know...
She's becoming the minister of everything, right?
Is it Megan Woods is now the minister of everything? Yeah, it's a great week for Wood named MPs. Michael Wood will probably have a moment before the week's out. So Muller, quickly, because I know you've got to go and give a fancy talk somewhere. Ben,
at the Northern Club.
He's got to give a talk at the Northern Club, which is very much his
fancy
tūranga waiwai,
schmancy. Yeah, that's his whare kōrero.
Let's just ask this for: do you work for Todd Muller?
I don't work for Todd Muller. I don't work for the National Party. I don't work for Matthew Hoodin. I'm a small mum and dad, salt of the earth, backbone of the economy, SME. Public relations and government relations practitioner.
Although it's fair to say you've gone from being like the good shepherd of Twitter to like the bad cop.
What do you mean?
Just been a little bit...
I've
been a little bit of a meanie lately on the Twitter.
I mute very liberally on Twitter because I think it's important that if you're like scrambling your brain with social media, you want to make the outputs as good as possible. I was catching up with somebody a week or two ago, I think during Mullergate, and they said, you're the second most hated person on New Zealand Twitter. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound right. I mean, my timeline is just full of people favouring my good tweets and saying nice things about me. And then they started reading out some very mean comments.
Yeah. So have you muted Annabelle on Twitter?
I'm pretty sure he has.
Absolutely not. I'm no Helen Clark.
Todd Muller on Sunday gave a speech at the local rugby club, as you do. it was like the whole idea was to just sort of go, oh, hi, I'm the new leader. Like, let's just pretend none of that happened. Let's just pretend none of the last 3 weeks happened. Nice to meet you all. I'm sure you've seen none of the coverage of the, manifold cock-ups that have befallen me since I took over this role. Nice to meet you. My name's Todd. He used the word love a lot. He was very in touch with Tino Rangatiratanga. He had an upside-down flag behind him. But anyway, and it was kind of fine. Did you catch up with that speech?
I haven't.
Annabelle?
I haven't watched the speech yet. And if, like me, you did miss that speech, fear not, because we have Todd Muller appearing on the Hui this weekend.
Ooh.
Yes.
The Hui, is that on Sunday mornings?
That's on Sunday mornings, 9:30 a.m. on 3. So I'm reserving judgment of Mr. Muller until we've set Mihi loose on him.
Have you got a flashcard test? Like pictures of national MPs on one side and whether they're Māori or not on the other side.
Good
Just
idea.
Kind of, like a snap
Good idea,
quiz.
Ben. Good idea, Ben. Maybe we'll do an iwi test.
I thought you could sort them into sort of possibles and probables. Shane Retty, probable.
Yeah.
Nikki Kay, let's not rule it out, but maybe not a strong contender.
Yes. What did you make of it, Ben?
The speech,
the whole thing. I mean, I guess the best thing that happened to him.
Have we not convened since?
What?
We haven't convened since the whole.
I don't think we have. I mean, Ben is obviously.
It was a
alluded
hard
to
track to watch, the one that Tova did, eh?
Well, that was the funniest thing I've ever seen.
It was a brilliant piece of work, and it was brilliant. It wasn't. I mean, if you read about it, Hayden did a good take, sort of scene by scene, blow by blow, play by play on it on the spinoff.co.nz. But the brilliant thing about the report is it wasn't layered with opinion or
not at all.
Or she wasn't trying to make jokes. It was just and it was beautifully edited. It was like that perfect news package where it was just the timing was just perfect. And if you talk to people who were in Camp Bridges, who many of whom are feeling understandably a bit bruised, they were like, what the fuck were they doing, letting the cameras go down the corridor? What was going on? It was, it was a bit of a mess.
It was extraordinary. Once you had Tova and the other gallery members just moving freely around in the corridor with all of the MPs just sort of milling about. It was like those nature documentaries where the lion gets in the middle of the pack of gazelles and they don't know which way to run. My favourite which I think is a little bit underrated, was the first time Nikki Kay interrupts Todd Muller to say, and obviously Paul Goldsmith is of Ngāti Porou descent, obviously. So it says it obviously twice because it's very clear. And but
look at the guy.
But just as the words are coming out of her mouth, this kind of flicker across her face, as if, like when you have an idea, but it's more sort of an impression and you haven't really verbalized it. And then as soon as you say it out loud, you're like, well, maybe that's not right, is it?
The other thing we have on our list, and we want Ben to be able to jump on his scooter or in his, what did you call, what's the otall? The inflatable ball full of piss.
Zorb.
Down
my
to
moon hopper to Remuera.
to the Northern Club, is the announcement that Shane Jones will stand in not Whangarei, in Northland, in fact, a seat held for a little while by Winston Peters when he won the by-election in 2015.
15, yep.
The by-election.
The by-election where Willa Jean Prime stood back. I think she was still on the ballot, but basically to give a clear run for Winston.
Andrew Little signalled very clearly to Labour voters.
And Jacinda Ardern said that won't happen this time. But, I mean, he does have a chance in that seat, I would have thought. He's sort of managed to... I think has he lost it before? He's definitely lost... Whangarei a few times.
He's lost Whangarei, he's lost Tamaki Makaurau, he has lost a tilt at the Labour Party leadership.
When did he lose Tamaki Makaurau?
I think 2000 and was it 5 or 8? It was against Peter Sharples.
But it is. He's been busy. I mean, the you know, if you want to be cynical, you'd call it pork barrelling. But obviously, Northland did need a lot of support, and the Provincial Growth Fund, and he is, as we know, the champion of the provinces, means that will have an effect. He will also, of course, Winston and he can work in tandem in that electorate, and they can most powerfully they can argue. You're going to get your national people anyway. It's one of those 2-for-1 deals. Why wouldn't you have a powerful voice?
Nobody panic. Matt King is not going anywhere.
That's right. We haven't seen that yet.
Fortunately, we have the baseline assurance that Matt King will be in the next parliament.
Yeah, that's true. What do you reckon, Bells?
About him standing in Northland?
About New Zealand First chances?
I think he potentially is in with a shot. I don't think it's a stupid idea. Who is it at the moment? Is it Matt King? It is Matt King. I'd be surprised, but hey.
I mean, he does. His name is.
Guy's got to try.
His name is King. You know, that's got to count for something.
It's pretty impressive.
That's not an accident. He must be a descendant of a king, presumably, to be called Matt King.
He's one of the only 60% of New Zealanders who aren't descended from Paul Goldsmith's great grandfather.
The situation going to the election, and obviously National have had a good week, if you want to call it that, in part because nothing absolutely terrible has gone wrong, apart from the Tiraranga Tiratanga flag being upside down, you know, they've been able to just watch as the government has had a lot of arrows directed at it over the handling of the COVID stuff, blah, blah, blah. But the before that, and maybe still a bit now, when you look at the polls, the danger for National and potentially the advantage for New Zealand First and the Greens, and this is the way they're likely to campaign, is that people will be voting not for whom they want to govern the country, but for which kind of Labour government they want. So, and that will be the narrative that the Greens will be pushing. There'll be a narrative probably the New Zealand First are pushing is you're not choosing between Labour and National, you're choosing about whether you want a Labour Ardern government that is moderated by our lot or an Ardern government that is moderated by that lot.
I think New Zealand First puts itself at a disadvantage too because it needs that 5%, but it refuses to stand Māori candidates in the Māori seats. We know that New Zealand First isn't going to win a Māori seat, but it makes
it... one time.
When?
Didn't it that one time?
They won all of them back in
96. It's in 96.
A long time ago.
In 96, a long time ago.
Yeah.
That was before Winston changed his approach, which was that they wouldn't contest any of the Māori seats because they don't believe in the Māori seats. But, you know, when you have a candidate standing in an electorate, even if you don't win, your party vote tends to go up when you have a presence.
Sure.
And so I wonder if potentially they would reconsider that, or if post-Winston, if that ever happens, they might change their policy around that.
Yeah, it is very important that National gets back some of that. You know, you'd probably say 10% of its natural support. They should never really be dropping below 40. They consolidated that right-wing vote back in 2005.
Oh, here she is.
So they
Tina, thanks so much for joining us.
Wow.
It's really great to...
I get it. I'm meant to be here.
Sorry, Ben, you were saying?
So National... They should be able to get back that 10%. That doesn't mean that they will, you know, particularly if the government can clamp down on these failures, you know, at the border, particularly if we remain COVID-free, particularly if the early indications that maybe the downturn won't be quite as bad as we expected, then the key thing is, you know, how they spend that $20 billion to try and pump up the recovery. It's Labour's election to lose. You know, they're in the driving seat. They will get to make decisions all the way up to the election, which will have huge dollar values, because they're running a rolling mall in response to an evolving crisis. This is it's a weird way to frame it, but this is an advantage that most governments don't have coming into an election. Normally, you're just talking about the future, and you sort of step back from day-to-day government. But where National has to make an impact here is, I think, Todd Muller's speech, it was a good speech. He's clearly not this alt-right extremist that, I think some of the more sort of enthusiastic kind of opponents on the left were trying to portray over the MAGA hat. But where National needs to make an impact is they actually need to start putting up about, why they're better managers of the recovery. They can't just rely on David Clark to gaff Labour's way out of office. There is $20 billion on the table that it is just accepted that a government of any stripe is going to have to spend. They can unveil some big ideas. Right now, we haven't seen that yet. What was it called? Job Start. That was a reasonable idea.
The one where you give employers cash
you give people a lump sum to give somebody a job. Pros and cons for it, but that's a reasonably big idea. Then they came to do their tourism package announcement. For some reason, they did it on a Friday afternoon, literally on top of a mountain in Queenstown, and gave, I think, the press gallery 16 hours notice, which meant all the flights were booked out, so there was no one there. It's almost like a Brothers Grimm fairy tale. If you can make it into the castle on the top of the mountain, surrounded by a moat, guarded by a dragon, then you can learn our policy. And it turned out that the policy...
See, that's the kind of ideas you'd have if you did have Ben Thomas and the Muller camp. That sort of shit would really have people... And not only would you have to get past all those hurdles, you'd have to do it in a piss-filled Zorb. Anyway, they've probably got your number if they need you.
DMs are open.
All right, you've got to get to the Northern Club. Have you got anything else to add?
Oh, wait, Māori Media Review.
Oh, Māori Media Review.
Oh.
Just, you want to...
No, we'll do it. Do it.
Go.
So, discussion document came out of TPK last week proposing, after sort of 2.5 years of work reviewing the Māori media sector, it had some interesting proposals in it, and one of them was the proposal to have a single Māori news service housed at Māori television, which obviously caused some concern and consternation over the last week. But it appears that, as the Prime Minister said, that that was a misinterpretation of the intent of the document, and in fact they're proposing a clearinghouse. As of yet, no one actually
it's quite weird
is
that
able
you
to
misinterpreted words to mean what the words
I
said.
know, it's weird, but like maths, I'm not good. Like I
Maybe
don't know my times table,
Maybe
but
you
I have.
misinterpreted the vibe.
Could be. I went home and practiced my alphabet after that, and
Yeah, okay.
I think I've got it on lock.
Okay, good.
But no one seems to be able to explain what a clearinghouse is in a journalism sense, because obviously clearinghouses are not a broadcasting term; they're a banking term. So anyway, that's started some discussions in the sector. It's been a bit rock and roll, but
it's definitely an interesting paper to read, given the how long-awaited it was. It would. I was curious. I thought perhaps they'd published an early draft by accident, but it's like there were bits. I mean, there were bits like where there was the word details. Just
more details.
And then is that a link, or is that someone meant to fill that bit in?
I actually think that this is a case where the minister has been let down by her officials and the author of this document. I think that, clearly it needed a lot more work. And it was quite prescriptive in parts. If this is about beginning a conversation, then perhaps don't lead with I propose a single Māori news service housed at Māori television. That seems to be very
very much,
particular.
Here is our
it?
list of options. One.
Yeah.
Ends.
Yeah.
Anyway, very fast turnaround on submissions on that, which like,
very fast turnaround on submissions. So what submissions usually run for 2 to 3 months, but with this one it was I think 3 weeks in total. So that's put the sector under a bit of stress as well, because everybody's got full-time jobs and stuff to do, and it's quite a big document, although it's fair to say that probably the first 35 pages aren't that important, and it's more the last sort of 8 pages where the rubber hits the road. So, it just seems that after 2.5 years, it's a pretty bungled process. And I think people, a bit of a missed opportunity to talk about the really important issues affecting our sector, and probably the biggest one is the inequity issues.
What do you mean by the inequity issues?
Well, I mean, for example, we've seen tens of millions of dollars poured into bailing out, private media companies, while Māori journalism has suffered a massive lack of underinvestment, and Māori broadcasting in general. The cost per hour for TMP-funded productions versus New Zealand on-air productions, through no fault of New Zealand on-airs, wage equity in our industry, like lots and lots and lots of big issues, difficult issues, and this paper unfortunately doesn't tackle those.
We look forward to hearing more about that in the next week or two to come. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Tina, for the
guest appearance.
For at least being in the room for part of the podcast.
Nice to see you occasionally.
We're really grateful for that indulgence.
It made us feel good, like we knew that we were creating something special.
It was like moving to level 0 for us. We suddenly felt liberated and free, and so we thank you for that. Thanks for listening, everyone. Love you. Bye.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I cordial with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBit.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.